We should be live. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me again on another episode of Dev Impressions. Today I'm joined by Phillip Carter, who is doing some F# stuff at Microsoft. Hey, Philip. How are you?
Howdy.
Yeah, how day, I guess. Well, everywhere day is as bad as everywhere else.
Yeah, it's a little overwhelming
Yeah.
living in a pandemic. Once in a century sort of thing. So
Yeah, but that's the
yeah,
same thing they've told us about like about the financial crash. Oh, the one is in century crash and terrible thing that happens, and now we have another in like 10 years.
yeah, it's pretty great. I fondly remember trying to find a job for like 2 years, and it was really difficult to try to find any kind of work while like going to community college and stuff. Um, so we'll see what happens this time around.
Yeah. Okay.
But
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. So maybe for people that don't know you somehow, are such people even around? Anyway, if they don't know you, can you say a
Yeah,
couple of words about yourself and what you do?
yeah, absolutely. So as Chris sort of mentioned, my name's Philip. I work for Microsoft on F Sharp. I've been working on F Sharp for almost 4 years now. I think it was like early, kind of like mid spring 2016 when I started. Um, and so yeah, I've been involved in a lot of different, basically all the different language version changes that we've done since then, the different integration changes, um, and sort of like the focus for .NET Core to go, sorry, the focus for F Sharp to go on .NET Core, that sort of stuff. Have been a lot of things that I've been involved in, and I also actually do other things at Microsoft because my title is program manager, which is kind of a useless title. It doesn't really mean anything, but in practice, what it does mean is that people who have that title sort of wear multiple hats. So I've been over time involved in like Azure tooling for Visual Studio, just sort of regular .NET tooling for Visual Studio all up. Some stuff related to the C Sharp compiler and like some of the work with nullable reference types and things like that. Um, and recently, I've also been involved in some efforts to try to get a better sense for who's using .NET with Visual Studio Code. Like, I know, people like you and certainly a lot of other F Sharp developers, but like, broadening it out to everybody who uses .NET with VS Code, like figuring out what kind of people they are. Like, are they generally new to .NET? Are they, .NET veterans, that sort of stuff. So yeah, in addition to F Sharp, I'm sort of playing around with a lot of different other stuff related to .NET to try to make it a better place to write code, hopefully with F Sharp.
Yes, so that Visual Studio Code stuff is actually interesting also to me. So anything that you can share about who is using Visual Studio Code and uh,
Yeah.
any details
Oh,
on
yeah.
that?
Yeah. I mean, it's, this isn't exactly conclusive, but, like through a series of surveys and reaching out to people individually and that sort of stuff, sort of the general makeup is that at least the trends seem to be that people who have less than 5 years of experience with .NET seem to prefer Visual Studio Code when they're doing .NET Core development. Then people who have 5 or more years of .NET experience tend to use Visual Studio over Visual Studio Code. And like, there's plenty of people who use VS because like that's what's used at their work, and so like they're like, hey, whatever, it's fine. I don't really, have that strong of an opinion about it one way or another. But when asking people specifically what they prefer to use and like what they were drawn to, especially people who are brand new to .NET, they actually tend to use Visual Studio Code first before they jump into Visual Studio. So that sort of gives an indication that at least the hypothesis that I have is that to grow .NET developer, the .NET developer base, and getting like new people onto the platform. I think improving the Visual Studio Code experience all up is really important. because Visual Studio has a massive user base that is doing just fine, and that needs to be continually improved. But it's not where the new people are sort of showing up. And again, there's caveats, like you can be new to .NET and you join, you get a job and the job says, hey, our environment is Visual Studio and that's just what you're using and you're new
Yeah.
to .NET. But like in terms of what the numbers that I'm seeing show, it's like new people are gravitating to VS Code. So
I mean,
um,
it makes sense from my point of view, where the Visual Studio Code is this basically uniformly loved thing that Microsoft has created. And even if you talk with like people from the ecosystem that has been traditionally hostile to Microsoft, they still are using Visual Studio Code. And
yeah,
and also .NET Core is also grabbing some more attention of people outside of like traditional .NET bubble, I guess. So I would imagine that those two facts together kind of bring people towards Visual Studio Code.
I think so, and I agree with that. And I think it's important to do this sort of work now because like my so I've been working for Microsoft for almost 5 years now, and sort of my view has been that it takes at least 3 years for like any sort of big change that we make to sort of permeate through the world. So like when I first joined, it was all about .NET Core internally at Microsoft. Um, but the majority of users were still entirely doing Windows development with .NET. There's a small sliver that were doing mono development, and there was also the Xamarin users who were using .NET in places other than Windows, which is really great. Um, but like the majority of .NET developers were on Windows, and that's just what their life was. Even though like .NET Core 1.0 came out, and that was kind of
That was
problematic.
bad, man.
Yeah, it was a bad release. Like, I mean, I think it was necessary, but it was bad. Um, which is why .NET Core 2.0 and then 2.1, 2.2 added back a whole bunch of APIs and basically said like, hey, you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater here. There are a lot of existing developers who want to use this stuff, but they don't want to rewrite all their code. So we should maybe try to acknowledge that. So that was that was a fun exercise, but like like I'm still, whenever I go to Microsoft conferences and I talk to people about F Sharp, a lot of people are still just for the first time using .NET Core. Or like, and you can just scan places like Hacker News or Reddit, and a ton of people are still like for the very first time still hearing about it and understanding, what it's all about. And, they initially think, oh, it's for Windows only. And then they go, no, it's not. And they go, wait, what? And then they get a bit more
Yeah,
interested. They find out they
yeah.
actually like it.
I know that. Well, that's the same as from like my experience of speaking at especially. So there's like bunch of conferences that has been traditionally friendly to .NET, and those have message already, like they've sent message that there is .NET Core. Conferences like NDC or Newcraft or things like that. That's traditionally been just a lot of .NET talks anyway. But then there
Yeah.
you go to some functional programming conferences, and I've been on a couple last year. And then people are so kind of have so old school view of Microsoft, Windows only, closed source, expensive IDE, expensive licenses for everything. So
Mhm.
it's really like it's generally the when I show them F Sharp, it's kind of like they are shocked that okay, you can actually do that all in Visual Studio Code. And by the way, we like Visual Studio Code. We hate Microsoft, but Visual Studio Code is great, man. And yeah, and they just didn't know that .NET Core exists, that .NET Core is open source, that .NET Core is cross-platform.
Yeah, exactly. And that's like, I mean, I think this is the sort of thing that over the next 5 years or so, we're still, it's that momentum is going to build. And it takes a long time. So like, when I was initially focused on, driving F Sharp or .NET Core support over, basically UWP at the time, that it was actually an interesting sort of time. Like if you're an external user, both are these brand new platforms. Like if you're not at Microsoft, both of these both of these are brand new platforms that are coming out. And like a lot, and traditionally .NET has been all about Windows. So you're like, okay, well, they should probably focus on the Windows one, right? Because that's what Windows is for. Um, and it was kind of controversial to sort of say, we're going to sideline the UWP stuff intentionally and focus entirely on .NET Core. And that's because
UWP had other problems.
had a lot of other problems, but like the fundamental fact of the matter is that it's one operating system, and the majority of software developers are not just targeting one OS, and they're not just using one OS. Like I mean, I think even for like people who deploy to Linux, the number one operating system for development is still Windows. But like that's by definition with there, like you need to have something that can work on a local environment on Windows, but can also be deployed to a Linux machine. To just meet table stakes. And like similarly, any sort of server side stuff that's going on, like all the tools, all the like the diagnostic tools, things like Docker, all that sort of stuff came from a Unix world. And a lot of existing .NET developers sort of saying like, hey, we see this thing happening and we want to take part in it. But we need the ability to do that. And so it was also reflected at the time of the amount of people working on stuff at Microsoft. Like on the .NET team, the vast majority of people working on .NET were working on .NET Core at the time. Like they were not working on the UWP stuff. And that's just there was a team working on UWP specifically for the runtime because that's what they had the budget for. But like that's the reason why they did that is the same reason for this whole focus on something now and wait 5 years before it pays off sort of situation. And
so was UWP team in Dev Division, or was it team from Windows Division when Windows Division still existed?
Is split. Yeah, that's true. There's no Windows Division at Microsoft anymore. It's been cut in half and moved around. There's a Windows development group, or at least at the time there was, and they were focused on the JavaScript development based stuff for UWP. That was born out of the Windows 8 era stuff when they wanted to focus on JavaScript, and they actually rightly predicted that as an ecosystem JavaScript would be the largest, and so they wanted to have a JavaScript environment on Windows. But I think the execution sort of didn't really pan out there. But they had a whole bunch of awesome tech left over, and so they were doing that. But the fact of the matter is that the majority of Windows developers are .NET developers, and so you can't just go up and tell them, hey, switch to JavaScript now or switch to C++. So there was funding specifically on the .NET runtime side provided by Windows to build out the .NET native support. Basically, it's basically a runtime and tool set designed for what they were trying to do with UWP. And that still exists today. And it's still it's something it's still being invested in insofar as like, I think it was sort of problematic from the get-go because like at the end of the day, it's a different .NET runtime. And .NET was moving to the .NET Core side of things, like in terms of where investments are going, and that's the runtime stuff. And so you have like this parallel runtime and parallel tool set. So one of the things that we are sort of focusing on also now is trying to bring the UWP stuff over to .NET Core. Because a lot of the changes that have gone into the .NET Core runtime have now sort of obviated all of the things that .NET Native actually bought you. Like startup time was basically the main thing. Yeah. Well, startup time with the .NET Core JIT now is just as fast, sometimes even faster, depending on what you're measuring. So like, it's just like the right thing to do. And so I don't know for sure if that's something that's landing in .NET 5 or not. I know that it's like on our like set of backlog items, and I think it may have been. I think the pandemic going on is going to affect that. Yeah. So I think our ambitions for .NET 5 have been scaled back a bit, like not necessarily explicitly yet, because we still want to say like hey, we have all these things we want to do, and we'll sort of get to what we can and finish and focus on doing things at a high quality. But yeah, that's actually an interesting, I think, perhaps segue into F# 5, which is going into .NET 5, because now with the pandemic sort of raging worldwide, I think things are going to be a little bit different. Like, we're still obviously like we're still releasing an F sharp 5 and things like that. But I think we had some ambitions for some features that were assuming, we had a team working at full capacity for the entire year, and that's actually not the case right now. So um, that's going to be an
Yeah,
interesting thing to sort of figure out.
yeah, I can imagine. I mean, okay, there's one comment in chat, and by the way, like,
Mhm.
feel free, like everyone listening or watching, feel free to ask questions in chat. So there's comment about people being scared of using .NET on Linux. They think it's second-class citizen there. So I guess this is about your typical old school, maybe not old school, but your typical Linux people. So kind of from my experience, the .NET people are really happy to deploy on Linux right now. So if
Mhm.
you are happy .NET Core user, then probably you deploy to Linux. That would be my like assumption that most happy .NET Core users are deploying to Linux. But how to bring your traditional uh, C++ Linux developers or your traditional Ruby people that deploy to Linux and yeah, they're
Mhm.
afraid that .NET is maybe not real open source or something like that.
I think there's an aspect of things that are still technically second class. Like, I mean, your favorite tool in the world, Purview, which has the most horrible UI in the world, but it's also probably like the most powerful performance profiling tool in the world. Like, it only works on Windows, and so like you can collect a lot of diagnostic information with .NET Core now outside of Windows, but like your tools for analyzing them are still better on Windows. And so that is, I mean, I view that as sort of like a point in time thing. Like, there's just an enormous amount of technology that was built for .NET on Windows, and over the past 10 years, we've been, very incrementally moving that stuff to be platform agnostic. To the point now, I think with .NET Core 3, there were some diagnostics
Yes.
tools specifically for Linux that were released. And that's something that the team is actually focused on a lot right now because, they sort of recognize that, okay, basically, like the runtime itself performs like best on, I mean, it's pretty much the same on any operating system at this point, but performs awesomely on Linux. Um, that's great. There's like good, with VS Code, you can develop on Linux as well. The CLI works in all those places and stuff like that. But sort of the next level, like diagnostics, tracing, being able to integrate with, APIs like open tracing, being able to use, gRPC, being able to use, like actually .NET works better on Docker with Linux than it does on Windows. But that's that's so. But there's gaps. So like I don't know if second class citizen is necessarily appropriate because every every single language has gaps in experiences depending on which operating system you're on. But I mean, I think like this sort of gets back to that point about things taking time. Like, the fact that we released, some diagnostics tooling that didn't exist before on Linux, is great, and people who are early adopters are very happy about that. But people who are not early adopters, they may not have even updated to the latest .NET Core, or they're not even using .NET Core, and they don't even, they don't know that those things exist yet. So I think that's something that just it takes a lot of time, because um, like it's the sort of thing
Yeah.
that like yeah, and then also there's like a lot of people who are used to using Windows moving to Linux, they're going to have to learn, it's a different environment that things are running in. And I can imagine that probably causes some tension between people who, love using Linux as a deployment environment. And, they have these people who, are used to Windows, asking all these questions, don't really know what all these things are. Um, yeah, I think it takes time.
Yeah, I agree
So
with that.
I'm personally quite positive about
Oh
it.
yeah, and kind of like Microsoft at least has, it seems that you are well, you like Microsoft, you are committed to the idea of bringing all this stuff to Linux. So, for example,
Hmm.
Ruby has been around for so many years, and it still sucks on Windows because no
Hmm.
one really gives a fuck about that. Uh,
Hmm.
because yeah, the assumption is that every cool Ruby developer uses, Mac and has cool MacBook Pro and code in coffee shop or something. And trying to even install Ruby on Windows to get something like Jekyll running on Windows, it's like not really pleasant experience. So I think that in
Yeah.
comparison, .NET is in better situation at least. Uh, yeah, that would be kind of so. It's easier to get started with .NET on Linux than it's to get started with Ruby on Windows. That's kind of what I see right now.
Yeah, I think that's probably true, and I think this is. I mean, we have a couple folks like on my team specifically who are entirely focused on Linux now. And one of them, he's really great. His name is Saurabh Shirati. He's been on the ASP.NET team a while, but he was the person who sort of drove the diagnostics tooling for Linux and .NET Core 3, and also some of the gRPC stuff. And so he's basically like all in on that right now. So like I think it's great because like that's you gotta put your money where your mouth is.
Yeah.
And so like it's nice to have someone get up on stage with a little Microsoft Heart Linux sort of t-shirt or something like that, but like you gotta have actual stuff working well there, and I think we're starting that.
Yeah.
Or rather, I think like we've been doing that for a while, but there's multiple layers to it. It's not just oh, you have a runtime in a language, have fun. Like there's you got to be able to work with all the different tooling there, and so that's something that we're also learning a lot more about because um, that world is changing all the time,
Yeah.
and it's a lot to keep up with, but yeah.
So to
So I think
to
we got
to answer a question in chat, no, you don't really need mono anymore on
yeah.
Linux. .NET FSI is working fairly well, and it will be even better. So mono is kind of needed only for Xamarin, I guess, nowadays.
Yeah. Yeah, it's still required for Xamarin, and I think that's going to still be the case with .NET 5, but in sort of a nuanced way. It's like a unified
Yeah.
runtime, and but I mean everything is going to be to the point where it can be a single runtime, but it's actually not going to be a single runtime yet because that's way too much to do in less than a year.
Oh yes,
Um,
and mono is also used in the other thing that I really don't like, which is Blazor.
yeah,
Anyway,
that's true. It is.
yeah,
Although
let's yeah
that's
let's
probably
not talk about
that's
that.
probably
F sharp
so
five,
yeah,
F sharp
yeah,
five. Yeah.
yeah. F sharp 5 .NET FSI, that's probably a good thing to start with. Yeah, so one of the first things that I guess like one of the big focus points for F sharp 5, especially I'd say since September of last year. So it basically all started out with us partnering a lot with the team that was sort of chartered with building out Jupyter Notebook support.
Mhm.
So going back even before September, um, there's sort of this poor reality. So like, or rather, let me frame it up this way. So before, let's say like 2015 or 2015 and earlier, using .NET on Linux was not very fun. You didn't like it wasn't very it was like you had to use Mono had a lot of problems. There was like no tooling. It was like you were completely on your own. Nobody at Microsoft really cared. Like that was, or I mean, like internally they actually did, but like certainly from the outside that was sort of the impression that you could get. Um, so I'd say we're at about that same point when it comes to machine learning and data science with .NET. And so, we've recently done some stuff like, released ML.NET, and that's continually improving. But and we have like a preview of like a data frames library, and there was I think like the tensor type was like added into the BCL and things like that. But like the all up, if you compare what you can do with Python with what you can do with .NET, it's it's ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
And like that's I view it as a very similar parallel, right? Like .NET on Linux was not a whole lot of fun. You could do it if you were really motivated, and similarly, you can do machine learning and data science with .NET if you're really motivated right now. But like there's a lot to improve. And I think ML.NET is at least one of the goals is to try to have sort of a base set of libraries available. I personally don't find the APIs that great to work with right now.
That's like everyone who I talk with about like ML.NET,
Yeah.
and they're all like,
But,
yeah, this
but
API is probably not the best.
yeah, and there's a little history behind that, but it's not really important. But like the fact of the matter is, it is an API, and it actually does work. And like, frankly, if you try to use TensorFlow with Python, it sucks too.
Yeah.
Like TensorFlow pre TensorFlow 2 was awful. It's still awful. Like and there's all the different machine learning frameworks out there for Python. Have like most of them have really bad APIs. They're trying to do all sorts of stuff that like Python was never even meant to do, and so they have their own DSLs and like their own like sort of like IL that they compile to that's like not this doesn't have the same semantics Python, and like it's a tire fire out there, but it's a tire fire that exists. Whereas and so like that was something that we sort of recognized, and we said, hey, like what do these people do? Well, there's a whole lot of different things that they do, ranging from just exploratory data analysis, just like point me at a data set and let me just play around with it and visualize a few things, to cutting edge research and deep learning and sort of everything in between. And like one of the primary environments for doing that is Jupyter Notebooks. And .NET for Jupyter Notebooks has never been something that Microsoft had invested in. Probably the most significant one that you could point at would be one that was started in the F# community by Rick Minerich and his folks, called IF#, and it was then handed off to a Microsoft researcher,
To
Colin
Colin,
Gravel. Yeah, and he just sort of like part-time would kind of keep it afloat, and that's like the amount of money that Microsoft was pumping into an experience like that, which is kind of silly. So we chatted a lot with Mark in the summer to sort of like try to get an understanding of, okay, you've been owning an experience like this for like a couple of years now. What's it like? What are the things to focus on? What are, all that sort of stuff. And so we said, okay, like there should be a base .NET kernel that can load C# or F# in a Jupyter Notebooks environment. That was sort of like
what
the
about Visual Basic?
I don't know. I mean, I think like it would probably be pretty easy to add one of those, but we haven't really gotten any signals from the VB community that it was something that they were interested in. So, so that was something that F# sort of came along with, and we sort of said, hey, this is a good thing for us to also focus on, because F# has had a long history of being interactive with F# Interactive, but F# Interactive had not been meaningfully invested in for at least probably 10 years. Like it's basically the same REPL that shipped with Visual Studio 2010.
Yep.
And like, I mean, there's been some minor improvements over the years with like some formatting changes, and a community member, Saul Renison, added some basic colorization with console colors, which is nice. There's been like bug fixes and things like that, but the base experience has not changed. But over the past 10 years, interactive experiences have changed dramatically. Like Jupyter Notebooks is a really big deal outside of the .NET world. And like it's like the meaning of interactivity when it comes to Jupyter Notebooks is very, very different from just a REPL. Like it's far more advanced. And so we said, hey, we want to be a part of this, and we want to potentially do some things that are a little bit different and unique, or maybe not necessarily unique, but just better than what you can do today with Python. And so that was the impetus behind improving core F# Interactive and implementing this component that tooling people like you have to know about, called the dependency manager, which is actually used by C# as well.
Yeah,
but so
that's why we had to remove the F# prefix from the DLL, right?
Yeah. But yeah, and so that's something that's been invested in very heavily because one of the big things that people have wanted to do for a long time is just be able to say, hey, I just want to reference a package instead of me having to go and download it manually, find all the DLLs, hope that it can reference everything correctly, hope that I get all the magic strings correct. That's made a little bit better if I'm using Packet and I use Packet load scripts, I
generate
believe it's
gener-
called.
generate load
Generate load
script. Yeah.
scripts. Yeah, generate load scripts. Um, but like that's still like that's an additional step when like what you really want is just I want to be able to reference a
Yeah.
package. And then similarly, people want to be able to say I want to reference a project or just a like instead of just like literally the string path to the ADLL.
Especially that you can see that features, and not only in mainstream languages, you can see them also in like Elixir, when you can like just fire their REPL inside of the project workspace, and then it will pick everything up. And in Haskell, even in Haskell, which is famous for not having good tooling, but in case of like this interactive experience, they kind of blow us out of the water anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, and so that's been something that we've been focused on for quite a few months now, and trying to like now the Jupyter Notebooks experience is in sort of like the second preview, I believe, and it's really stable. I recommend people use it a lot. I use it more than F Sharp Interactive now because it's a lot better. I think like I like the formatted output basically, and like being able to put in charts and things like that.
Well,
Um,
there was one investment into F Sharp REPL. Back in Atom days, there was F Sharp interactive Atom plugin that I
mm,
created with Thomas Petricek, and it had this wonderful like graphical output in F Sharp interactive output. So that
mhm.
may have been before like your times, at least like your times as a PM. But yeah, that was fun. Uh, Unfortunately, that kind of died.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, I think this is like the reason why I'm spending a lot of time on this from like just talking about it perspective is like it's real. Improving the interactive experience is all up for F sharp is a big deal because we want F sharp like I think F sharp is a lot more attractive than C sharp for Python developers who feel disenfranchised with their language and environment. Like, I think there's a lot of people who are doing data science and machine learning who are like structured with their thinking. They like things like types and things like that, and they don't get it with Python.
But
Like we've
they,
talked with a lot
yeah,
of
and
data
and they are
scientists.
forced to use Python because that's only tool at the moment, right?
Yeah, yeah, they're not like a lot of the people who we talk to are not particularly in love with Python. I mean, some are, and that's fine. Like it works great for them, but a lot of them aren't. And the way that they like to think about the world is a lot more structured, which aligns with static typing. But a lot of them are not necessarily programmers by trade, and so they don't like a lot of programmers had to learn about curly braces because that's what they learned in school. But if you didn't learn that as like in school, you see a bunch of curly braces and it looks like a bunch of noisy nonsense. Like that's just how it. Curly braces and semicolons are this. People don't like it. They that's why like we all feel that internally, and so we want to focus on better interactive experiences for F sharp and try to focus on language features that can enhance that sort of stuff. So that's been a lot of the focus with F sharp 5 up until this point is sort of the things that like make the language generally nicer to use but tend to be used a bit more in an interactive environment than other environments or things that we focused on, like trying to improve slicing and indexing, um, like cleaning up some of the stuff with the 3D and 4D array types that we
Mm-hmm.
have, um, things like that. Another one, which is the fancy named one, the applicative computation expressions. Like you don't have to really know what that actually means. I mean, basically the reason for doing it is in basically like enhanced expressivity
Mm-hmm.
with some DSLs.
Yep.
Because DSLs matter in this sort of world, and you want to be able to, write good DSLs, and you want to have better tools for doing that. Another, some other ones that we kind of have in the pipeline are, not really things that users are going to use that much, but one of them is uh, being able to take what are called trait constraints. Um, Basically, like if you specify that, like, this type T is constrained in a particular way, it could be a static constraint. Being able to translate that over into F sharp quotations, because you might have a library that uses F sharp quotations to take an F sharp syntax tree and try to run it on a GPU, like
Yeah.
basically try to run it in an environment where it's executed on a GPU. Well, one of the problems today with that is you lose type safety because constraints are erased when they're translated into an F sharp quotation. So like that's one of those things that if you're like me and I'm just a simple country F sharp programmer, um, like you know you're not really going to use that like explicitly, but it's something that should just work if you're trying to do the sorts of things that it's intended for. That's also another one of the other features for that we've been focusing on that's really mostly driven by being able to put operators and type extensions. Um, and like the reason why for that is like it's basically just being able to do arithmetic on arbitrary types. So again, you have a library that implements an arithmetic for types that are useful for certain things that you're trying to do, like different vector types, matrix
Mm-hmm.
types, that sort of stuff. And you can use an arithmetic on that without jumping over too many hoops. Like you don't have to call a plus method; you can just use the plus sign, things like that. And there's some places where that works today, but there's some places where it falls apart today, and that's one of the other things that we're sort of focused on. So like all of that is, I think all of these things sort of improve general F sharp programming. But when you're in an interactive, often sort of analytical focused environment, there's like a set of things that you tend to use a bit more,
Yep.
and we want to make those just cleaner as a whole.
So, do you want to show us some of those stuff? I think we should be able to share your screen and to show some of the demos. Let
Yeah,
let me let me let me check that. Are you sharing your screen?
yeah. People should be
People
able to
should
see
be able
your
to see
face
your
now.
face now. Yes, I believe they are seeing my face. Okay, so
Okay.
get my face out of the yeah.
Okay,
Okay,
there
there
we
we
go.
go.
So
So
I
I
should
should
be,
be.
it
It
said
said
sharing
sharing
screen.
screen.
Do
Do
you
you
see
see
a
a
Jupyter
Jupyter
notebook
notebook
that
that
says
says
F
F
sharp
sharp
5
5
preview
preview
on
on
it?
it? Uh, yeah, I'm looking at the video, so yes, it should be that. Anyone in chat can confirm that we see Philip's voice is doubling. Uh,
No.
is that better? Yeah, well, that was probably something on my side. Yeah, because I've added another source for the Skype, and probably it also like sends your voice 2 times.
Good old streaming.
Yeah.
Good old. Okay, fantastic. Um, yeah, just gotta. Okay, just gotta see. Okay, so are you able to confirm that you can see this Jupyter notebook here? Because I don't like on my machine when I swipe over to like your face, I see like this little red border around everything. Um, but
Yeah,
I
it
don't.
seems good. Yeah, I think that people can see the Jupyter notebook. At least
Okay,
that's what
if it can.
that's what I see, and I'm watching also the stream. So yeah.
Okay, fantastic. All right, we'll go with that. So, this is a notebook that I started out in South Korea earlier this year because me and my wife traveled there to visit her family that
Oh,
she hasn't seen in about
how was
years.
that? How was that actually? How was the trip?
It was awesome. It was really good. It was like right before this whole pandemic really
Yeah.
started taking off outside of China. So it was kind of spooky near the end because it was fine while we were there, but like in the last 2 days, it was really starting to like rise in China.
Yeah, so I
Um,
was in Barcelona for a couple of weeks just before, and the day I left Barcelona was actually the day when they got first case in Spain. So that was like,
uh-huh.
yeah.
Yeah, but but so they have a new meetup in Seoul. Um, F sharp South Korea is the name of the meetup, and so I gave a talk with like some very early F sharp bits, and so this is based off of that, but I've since enhanced it. But so yeah, there's quite a number of features here. This is something that can be shared out. This once you have like, and I think there's if you click on this link, this Jupyter Notebooks for .NET thing, it tells you how to install Jupyter Notebooks for .NET, so you could actually run this notebook. But so anyways, one of the things I'm going to cover here is slicing and index improvements all up. So for those of you who don't know, you can slice all these different collection types. We have all these built-in F sharp collection types in F sharp core, and you can slice them. And so like here, I created a list, an array, and a string, and they're all sliceable, right? So I can go, from the 5th index all the way to the end by typing L.5, dot, and that produces a slice that's, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So this is something you've always been able to do today. But this that I'm going to execute right here, prior to F sharp 5 would throw an exception. So this is the part where it's weird. This code would not, right? So what I'm actually doing here, I'm creating a nonsensical slice, right? From negative 2 to -1. That doesn't exist. So all the way up in like today in F sharp 4.
I'm actually surprised. I always thought that it's like enforcing unsigned integers on the type level.
No,
Oh.
No, it's all it does in this case is it produces an empty list. Because and I think that the rationale sort of makes sense, which is that a non-existent slice is empty, basically, or could be empty, or it could throw an exception, whatever you want. But like in functional languages, we like to compose stuff, and empty lists compose with other lists. Same thing with arrays, same thing with strings, right? You can add the empty string to any string, and it's just that string. So, basically what this does, this is creating some nonsensical slices, and, showing that, they're all empty. Now, you're probably not going to write code with like the literal -2 and the literal -1 here. But that might be an X and a Y. And you may be surprised to find that, if you do it with a list, it works. But if you change to an array, I don't know, maybe for performance reasons or something like that, all of a sudden it throws an exception. You're like, wait, what? And that's inconsistent. So we decided to not throw an exception and instead just produce empty ones, because all these empty things compose. So this is something that might be controversial with some people. Some people, like, one thing that I found when it comes to slices and indexes is people have very strong opinions.
Oh yeah, I remember all the C# discussions about slices and like what's inclusive collection creation and what's exclusive creation collection, and things like that.
It never ends. It's like tabs versus spaces. And so the main reason why we did this is they compose, and instead we could have made one throw an exception now and make that a breaking change, or we could loosen that restriction and not throw an exception and not do a breaking change. So that's something that is subject to change, right? So we're in the preview cycle right now. So because we're in previews, we reserve the right to make breaking changes from preview to preview until we hit the release candidate. Once we're at a release candidate, we're not going to make any more breaking changes. So this is sort of the time to try things out and see if any of these design decisions impact you negatively. And if they do, let us know about it. So moving on, we have that. But so here's an interesting one. So with 3D and 4D array slices, or really what are sort of like fixed index slices, I'm going to use a 3D array as an example here. So you can imagine a 3D array with the z equals 0 and 1 dimensions here, and then these are the 2D arrays in each dimension. Basically 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But say I wanted to get this slice, this single dimensional array slice out of this thing. It was possible to do prior to F sharp 5, but it was not very fun.
Oh yeah.
So like what you would expect to be able to do is do some sort of, how like you can just do a slice like right up here. You would expect to be able to do some sort of, slicey thingy kind of like that, right?
Yep.
But it actually doesn't work. it actually doesn't work prior to F sharp 5. Fixing a particular index, right? In this case, I want to fix the Z index. I want to fix the Y index, right? I just want to, or the whichever one is the Y index, right? I want to fix two indexes in this case. But that was not possible prior to F sharp 5. Now it actually is. So in this case, the star means I don't care, give me everything, and I want to fix onto the 0y and onto the zeroth the zeroth y index and then the one z index.
And
And that will
this
produce a
gives
single.
me 1D array, right? Yeah, well, list.
Yes.
If I do two stars in my slice, so it will be star and yeah, this will give me.
Yeah.
Oh, that's all.
Two.
Well, that's
Well, don't be the output here.
okay. Okay.
This is just like flattening the output in this case, right?
So this
But
should
so
be like
this,
2D array, right?
yeah, that would basically be a 2D array. I think if you did something like this.
Oh yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, there we go.
Awesome.
So using the built-in F sharp formatting, you do that. If I use the notebook formatting, which prints an HTML table, then it flattens it out, which is something that we want to try to make a little bit better.
Yeah, that was like confusing for like, you know, I'm saying that for the first time, so you know, it's kind of my reactions are kind of totally newcomer coming to the Jupyter Notebook F sharp.
That's good. Yeah, so this is something that, not a terrible amount of people are necessarily going to use, but those who are using these data types have been wanting this for a long time, so that's pretty good. Another thing with slices and indexes that we have is from the end.
Mm-hmm.
So in this case, if I want to go 5 from the end from a list from 1 to 10, I can just do that, and it gives me 5, which is nice. And so this is just contrasting to two ways to accomplish the same thing. Say I want to go from 3 to the end all the way until the end. I want to get that slice. This is the code you have to write prior to F sharp 5. X.length minus 4 to get the 3 from the end.
Can I do something like XS 2 dots and then -3? So all elements up until the 1/3 from the end. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, you can.
Awesome.
I mean, obviously it produces a different thing, but say I do this. So these are, also equivalent slices, right? In this case, from the beginning all the way until 3 from the end. This first one is nonsense and confusing. This one, I think, is not very confusing because I want something 3 from the end. So I just say, in this case, we need the caret. We don't do a negative number. The reason why is because that would be a break and change, which is fun. But, it's just syntax. And that's something that's pretty great. So another fun thing that you can do is you can, this is defined by a member called reverse index that takes in a dimension and then an offset. And you can augment any existing type
Awesome.
with this. So in this case, I'm going to modify the span type to first be able to extract a slice with F sharp. And then this is the span type in .NET Core. And then I'm going to also allow it to specify a reverse index. So in this case, I have some code in the first one. Right here, I just have an array 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 that I've specified as a span, and then I'm just going to write some slices right here from these are normal slices that you can do with this type extension. But now I have the equivalent slices that I'm going to produce using only from the end slicing, which is kind of silly.
Well, but, details.
I think it sort of goes to show that like this is 0 from the end is the end. 2 from the end is the same as the third index in this case. From 4 from the end to 2 from the end is the same thing from 1 to 3. That's like, it all basically works. All you got to do is just implement this particular member. So you can get reverse indexes from your own your like types that you don't necessarily own, which is really
Awesome.
great. So you can augment the span type like that.
Yeah, this is really good.
Yeah. So that's all slicing and dicing. Um, move on to name of,
Hmm.
which is if you use C sharp, you're probably used to using this one. It's helpful for logging. It's helpful for parameter validation. It's just a nice utility. So in this case, to demonstrate that, I have a list of months, and then I have something that I called this thing dude. I should call it month. I think I was demonstrating something else. There we go. Dude is not defined. Okay, there we go. Cool. So in this case, I'm just calling, it's just taking an integer, and then if it's not in the correct range, I'm throwing in valid arg, and then I'm going to take name of month instead of having to specify the string literal month, and then you can see right here in the stack trace, it'll explicitly say parameter month. This is, I think, something that'll be helpful for a lot of people. I've found myself using name of quite a lot once it was available to me. It's just something that like just comes up from time to time, and anytime I feel like I need to use it, I just use it, and it's great.
Yep.
So I'm really happy about this one. And you can take a name of all sorts of different things. So, in this case, I can take a name of a module, a module, a function, and a parameter. In
So
this case,
why the second one is not m.f but just f?
It's just a design decision.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's similar to like how in C sharp you can have like a class with name of, and then you can go like name of class dot name of member, and it just gives you the name of the member. It doesn't, fully qualify it. I think that's basically the same sorts of thing. There are some things that are still sort of missing from the design on this one. Like the core design is in place and it's stable and it works. But there's a few little edge cases. If you have overloaded method names, you still like there was yeah, there's a small handful of things where it doesn't work as you would expect, and we're going to try to sort of fix that up before F sharp 5. I mean, I think like the primary use, which is in this case, taking names of parameters, all works exactly as you would expect.
There's a question from chat. Can you take the name from the static member on the class? You have class with static members, and well, I guess that's basically F in module M is basically static member, but
let's see. Oh, I didn't.
it's dude.
Oh, it's dude.
Uppercase dude, man.
Oh, my keyboard isn't working.
Huh.
No, I don't. I think you need to. There's some problems.
There's typo on member. Member.
There we go. Okay, yeah.
I should tell you. You should start explaining why it doesn't work, and then we should tell you that it's typo.
Well, so there are some. There is a restriction. Like, say I go type dude, and I go member. Right. I can't do this. Right. That will fail. And this is something you can't do in C sharp.
But if you would create an instance of dude, so
if you do, you can.
Okay.
So this is it's really an edge case, and that's sort of where it's sort of at. It's not like it like fails to take it. It's like this was actually an explicit design decision that we're thinking of adjusting. Similarly, if you have an overloaded method, so say I had a second M, then I would need to like the explicit design decision actually falls through with how most of checking in F sharp works, where we didn't really necessarily want to add a special case that sort of says like oh hey, the fact that you're doing this inside of a name of means that you don't need to be a bit more explicit about your overloads, whereas in F sharp oftentimes you have to do that with normal code. But that's something that we're going to be revisiting. So I think it's the sort of thing that like people can use and probably honestly rely on for their normal code today, because most of the uses for name of are mostly in parameter validation.
Yeah.
But yeah. So there's basically going to be some more things you can do added to it. So another one, speaking of static classes, is the ability to open them. So this one is really straightforward. You just open system.math and I can access pi. And in this case, I can define my own. So static classes, fun fact, are not actually real. They are just abstract and sealed classes. Yeah. That's what a static class is. So in this case, I've created my own static class that I've called A, and then I have a method on it called add that takes in, it just does x plus y. So I can open A, and then I can use pi, which I've opened in this cell here.
I'm not a huge fan of this feature.
Yeah, it's nice, especially with a lot of libraries that sort of rely on the feature being there. It helps with a lot of expressivity, which is great.
Well, yeah. So is that breaking change? Is that potentially leads to failure in overload resolution? Well, does it?
No, not in this case. So I mean, like anytime you bring methods into scope.
Yeah, they're over in the order, right? Scope, yeah, the order of opening. Yes.
Yeah, so you would need to explicitly bring some of these methods into scope and then, create one of those ambiguity errors. One of the things that we are thinking of doing, so currently the design of this is one that follows the way that like functions and modules work, right? So say I define two modules with the same name and I open both of them. What happens is the second one shadows the first one. So if I try to access a function inside of the first one, I need to explicitly qualify it. I can't just open both and then call it. That is actually also the same with opening of static classes today. So if I have two static classes that have the same name, one will shadow the other one, or they could have a different name, but then they could have different abstract class names, but I could have the same name of the static member. The one that is been most recently brought into scope will shadow the other one. One change that we're thinking of doing, right? So let me just demonstrate this here. If I go X. Oh, right. Notebook state is that's right. I didn't open it. There we go. So in this case, I've defined two static classes, and then I have a member add and another one here. But in this case, it says, hey, I'm passing in, two arguments, but I really should only be passing in one. That's because this static member shadows this one. And this follows the way that F# functions work. One change that we're thinking of doing is modifying this so that static members work differently, right? One change that we're thinking of doing is once these two are open, a method overload set is created on the fly, as if they existed on a single class as two overloaded methods. This is the way that it works in C#. There's trade-offs to that, right? So the way that it works today is consistent with how most other parts of the language work today, which is why it was designed that way. But specifically when you are working with methods, you tend to expect overloads to be there. And it might be a little bit confusing to people that, these things that are clearly compatible if they're in an overload set, right?
Well,
You would expect them to you might
but the
expect that.
problem is that you don't know difference. So with this opening static class, you don't know if system.math is a module or is that a static class that you've just opened as an end user. You kind of just open it and you don't care. So you should have the similar behavior because you opened some things and they work one way, and then you opened another things and you may not know they are different. Well, I guess we have semantic highlighting now everywhere, so you will notice that they are different, but still, if you read code on GitHub or something like that.
Yeah, and that's sort of a difficult point that we want to play around with that. We'll see where we land. Like there's sort of clearly it's like, like a lot of things in language design, there's no clear correct answer here, right? Do we make something look and feel a bit more convenient but make it less consistent with how other parts of the language work, or do we make something a bit more consistent with how the language works but lose some convenience along the way? So this is something that, the core mechanism and the core design all works, it's stable, and, realistically, most people are not doing this, right? Most people are just importing a single static class and they're using methods from it.
Can you put required qualified access on your type B or type A? If I don't...
yes, I believe you should be able to. My shift key is kind of weird here. I think you can do that. You can do like auto open as well, as a part of the feature.
So now this should work again, right? Because
sorry.
So with required qualified access, the code sample should just work again because
it should in theory. There's sort of a weird trick with notebook state where it might be kind of
yeah, whatever.
I can try it on. Okay, well that's something we play around with later. But so there's some weirdness with those modules as well that we're gonna try to work with. But yeah. Anyways, moving on here, we got the fancy one that I mentioned before, well, the fancy name, applicative computation expressions. So, people who like this feature are probably going to be happy with this because this allows you to encode applicatives in F# rather than just monads and monoids. And if you want to learn about that, go read some Haskell docs. You won't be confused, trust me. But really sort of the main difference with all of this is I think it becomes a lot more evident in code. So in this case right here, I have this result builder that I've defined and I'm going to use it. And notice how I have let bang A and then I have and bang B and bang C, right? The key thing about this is this block, each of these computations are independent from one another. That's sort of the key difference between being applicative versus monadic, right? If they're monadic, then they're not necessarily independent, right? Like producing B could depend on the value produced in A, and that would then make it monadic. But if they're truly independent, right? A, B, and C don't depend on each other, then they can be made applicative, and when they're applicative, they can be ran independently. I think some documentation out there in the Haskell world will use the term parallel. It's a bit of a misnomer because it doesn't necessarily mean executing in parallel. But really what it should be saying is executing independently from one another. So in this case, the only time you can use them together is when you're actually finishing out this computation. And in this case, I'm returning A plus B minus C. I have a sample that I could share where I define an applicative builder for async, where where all of the computations are run independently from one another. So they're all run concurrently at the same time. So you could have a bunch of asynchronous computations kicked off basically at the same time. No, not in parallel, right? They're not, like, I could have written it to explicitly schedule them in parallel. But in this case, they're just ran concurrently. And sort of the restriction being that you can't use one of the values from an async computation in another one. But
so is that
the benefit
restriction somehow visible in the source code? So like if I've tried to pass a into, let's say, result value 2 was a function, and I tried to pass a into that, what would happen?
Oh yeah, you'll get an error. Like
awesome.
F X. Let's say I call it like that. That should fail.
The control maybe. Yeah, awesome. So
is this the specific error? I could have also just written it wrong.
I think that's what I would expect.
But I think if I do this, yeah, this in this case, so like this is another case where I've written the correct thing, but mixing and matching consecutive let bangs like this and an and bang is also not allowed. Like basically, and that sort of goes with this whole monadic versus applicative.
Okay, so you cannot have a computation expression that is doing, let's say, 3 operations as applicative, and then in monadic way next 3 operations as applicative. So if I have like let bank A and bank B and bank C, and then I have let bank D and bank E and bank F, can I do that?
You can mix and match, but they have to be explicit computations. I think I have a fun,
because this is like interesting from, for example, validation computation expression. So you kind of have a bunch of validations that you can run as a first step. Then if they pass, you have bunch of validations that you can run using, for example, results from this first validations, and so on.
Yeah, if I I'm going to create a new notebook here. Okay, go with sharp. Okay, I've got a big one here. There we go. Okay, it ran. So there's a lot going on here, but I have this merge sources method defined and this bind return method defined, which are exactly what were defined over here, right? It's the exact same thing. But I've also got return from 0, bind, delay, run, all of this. So this is a full result thing right here. So the key thing that's going on here is I have some embedded results, right? I have a first one, which is monadic, and then an embedded one, which is applicative. Right, so this applicative one, this should look very familiar, right? This is the exact same thing that I showed before. But then the result of that is R1, and then I have that embedded inside of this guy right here. Now I can't do something like this.
But you could theoretically have another applicative. Just, if you copy R1 whole block and put that as a R5, then it should work. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, if I were to do, basically
copy paste it.
Yeah, like sort of this exact same thing, but for a thing called R5, and have that embedded computation be an applicative, then that would work. So yeah, you can mix and match like that.
So Jimmy is asking a question. If I have a library that uses CEs like this, if I put merge source and bind return, will it just light up when using F#5, or do I have to compile the binary for that version?
I think it should just light up because you should be able to define these. Can you? Yeah, you can define these via type extension. So you just need to have the updated compiler
on the project using this library, right?
Yeah, on the project using this library. Now, but if you wanted to extend your library without recompiling the binary, that would not work.
Yeah, but I mean the question is so you can prepare for. I guess that's what Jimmy means. Right now with 4.7, you can still prepare your library for for
Yeah, in this case,
5.0.
hmm, I think you could add these members today in F sharp 4.7, and they would and you could even recompile your binary, and it won't blow up or anything. Um, it'll only be with F sharp 5.0 that it'll recognize those additional members as being this additional capability that you have. So I think that should work.
Oh, because
Yeah.
FS tooltip error handling. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, that should be fine.
Yeah, I think you should be able to do it. If not, then I'm wrong. It's just happened plenty of times before. Um, so, and then the other thing that I wanted to show with that is, this sort of works as you would expect, right? So if I have, a middle one here, which is actually an error, then what I get is the error, right? I don't get some like totally destroyed result in this case. So it sort of works basically the same way. Another one of the benefits that you could have here is each of these are ran. So with monadic stuff, let's say I wanted to run all three, result value one, result value two, and result value three. But result value one returned an error. Today, it just short circuits
Yeah.
out. Um, that doesn't happen with applicatives.
Yeah.
So that's another
Yeah, so
benefit.
this will be also great for
Uh,
like validation because you will not just get first error from validation, but you will possibly get all the errors from like multiple
yeah,
validations. If you have some DTO and you validate, oh, name must be this, and then surname must be this, and then birthday must be this, then with this applicative new thing, you can possibly get all errors that happened in the validation if they are independent.
yeah. Um, so then the last one, which is really
Yeah,
straightforward,
that's my favorite one.
package references and F sharp
It's
interactive.
not straightforward. You just pretend it's straightforward.
It's straightforward if you're a user. It's not straightforward if you're not a user. So in this case, you just go pound our NuGet newtonsoft.json. I can open it now as if I installed it in a project, and I can just use it in a single code block, and then bam, I've serialized my object. A lot of work has gone into this one because, as it turns out, a lot of packages out there do some really weird stuff with how they package up binaries. Um, and there was all sorts of very interesting problems that we had to solve over the course of about 2 months to figure out how to resolve different kinds of dependencies that packages will bring along. Um, like, for example, ML.NET has numerous native
Oh
dependencies.
yeah.
Being able to resolve that was fun. Um,
Matthias is ranting about that all the time.
oh yeah, Sharp um, also has native dependencies, but it does really weird stuff with how it packages them up. And that was like another like 2 weeks or so of figuring that out. And so one of the things that you do have to do, so I've used the simplified syntax here. I can also go, version
Yeah.
equals blah, 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 right? If I'm using a pre-release package, I need to specify version, right? So for example, I believe it's a diff sharp is an example of a package that doesn't have it only has pre-release versions up on NuGet. So you have to actually explicitly say version equals, 123 dash preview or like, whatever the preview version is. And that's because all this actually does is use an underlying NuGet API. So it's similar to how .NET add package works today, where unfortunately there's this restriction where if you call .NET add package from the command line, it won't add it if it's a preview, pre-release.
Really? Oh my god.
So that's how that works. So that could improve in the future. If that changes on the NuGet side, then we'll, sort of get that improvement for free, basically, because all we do is just use the same APIs. Um, so we got that. And then the very last thing that I wanted to show is it's nothing to do with F Sharp 5. It's only the notebooks, and that is pretty charts. So in this case, this chart.line call right here, this is from the F Sharp package called xplot. And we actually, in the notebooks, use it. We take a dependency on xplot in notebooks all up for both C# and F#, because it's an awesome package for plotting. And so In this case, this is how I could define, a nice little sine wave. I can do all sorts of really weird charts with XPlot, but this one is more fun. And so I think this sort of gets to the whole point of improving interactivity, right? Like with F Sharp Interactive today, you can't produce a nice chart like this. It totally changes the game when you want to visualize output. And that's something that we're not necessarily implementing like literally for F Sharp, right? Like a lot of the stuff is at the kernel level for the Jupyter Notebook support. It's not, literally in F Sharp Interactive. But we're doing, sort of work on sort of the fringes of that to try to make that experience as good as possible. So um, that's pretty much all I got for showing things.
Well, there's
in terms
important
of
thing that you don't mention in this document. So the hash R thingy is extendable, right? You can create, well, we can create our own dependency managers that will have, for example, hash R. Yeah, exactly.
create Christoph.
Exactly.
Right. Packet. Create .NET and our Hopack.
Hopacket.
Hopacket, the re-implementation of Packet using Hopack. Yeah, you can do that. It's an extensible mechanism. There's this component called the dependency manager that we built that Chris is currently having a lot of fun trying to depend on.
Well,
and I'm gonna
cancel screen sharing.
I'm gonna cancel my screen share here.
Get back
to grant permissions to share your screen. What?
It doesn't matter. Your screen is not showing anymore. It's just you right now. So.
Oh, lovely. Okay. Oh yeah, it's not showing here. Okay, great.
Yeah, awesome. That was really cool. So, what's the timeline on all this? So, what's the when there will be .NET 5 release and F Sharp 5 release? I assume that it's going to be together, those two.
Yeah, it's all going to be together. It's we're aiming for sometime in November for .NET 5 and F Sharp 5. I think like realistically, we're aiming for sometime in July to like stabilize everything. And sort of from there on out, no new features, just stabilizing everything, fixing bugs, that sort of stuff. So we're still in the feature development and adding features sort of world right now. But I think it's a little interesting with the COVID-19 outbreak because like we're not operating at full capacity right now. Like we're all working from home, but we're not. First of all, we're not all normally work from home people. We normally work in an office, and so we don't have like things set up properly to do normal work. On top of that, anybody who has kids, all their kids are home as well, and so they're a lot less productive because of that. Because kids don't want to do homework, and you got to make them do it as a parent. So like we have a lot of people on the team who will they'll just drop off for a few hours and they're like, hey, sorry, something's up with the kids right now. I got to deal with it. Bye. And that like it adds up over time. Yep. Little things like a doctor's visit are a lot more freaky and challenging now. And so that increases stress and it makes it harder to focus on things. And so, I don't know what the impact of that is going to be because we sort of had this set of features that we were thinking were probably going to make it in. And right now, it's still, we're still planning on that. But certainly over the past 2 or 3 weeks, I'd say like our overall productivity has been down like at least 50%. So I don't know how long that's going to last necessarily, but it's definitely going to have an impact on, what's available for F Sharp 5. Like, it could be that, everything that I showed is actually the entire feature set. And we just focus on stabilizing it because that's all we can really afford to do during this time. But it could also be that we sort of figure out a way to be more productive again and then add some more features and then, there we go.
I think one big one was the nullable things from C Sharp. Were we using that or like we understand the info? And I believe a lot of people,
I
lot of
think
people were excited about this one.
yeah, I think we're gonna scope that one out. Because I mean it's helpful, right, to be able to get warnings for like strings and things like that. Um, but it requires a ton of work to implement correctly. And like, I think we were on the fence about scoping it out for F Sharp 5 anyways, but I think now with the pandemic in play and, the reduced capacity that we just have, um, yeah, I highly doubt it's going to happen. I think there's some other features that might make it in. Dawn has recently been, sort of revamping some work on interpolated strings, which were I think it'd be nice to get in. Similarly, there's some task
Oh yeah.
support for F sharp.core that we'd like to get in. But like there's a big difference between a pull request that looks like it's pretty good and something that's actually stable and shippable and that sort of stuff. There's like usually multiple months of work involved from something was merged into the code base until something is like actually ready to be released. So we'll have to see where that all lands. Yeah, I wish there was like more of a roadmap to share. Actually, like we had more of a concrete thing, but now with a lot less work going on, it's a little challenging. So
Yeah.
we'll see how that happens.
One more question from chat. Is F Sharp support coming to notebooks in Cosmos DB? Do you know anything about Cosmos DB?
Notebooks in Cosmos DB. I've never used notebooks in Cosmos DB. I know that there's like some Azure notebooks that can connect to them, and I know that there's a variety of different services in Azure that have their own notebook implementations. So I think in the long term, yes, because anything that uses .NET in those notebooks have these disparate notebook implementations and experiences. We are working with those teams to sort of unify around the singular .NET kernel. And that's because, well, most teams don't want to implement, their own language service and all that sort of stuff, even though it can be fun.
Yeah, really a lot of fun, man.
They would prefer to have an actual dedicated team who is focused on supporting the core mechanism. So I think that's something that's happening. I can't really speak towards any particular time frame on it though, largely because the notebook support for .NET is still in preview. So we still need to sort of get our own ducks in a row first. And then once that's fully released and stable, I think we're going to start thinking about expanding it into these different notebook environments, especially those that live in Azure services. So
can we get Jupyter Notebook integration in Ionite, like the Python extension for Visual Studio Code? I have absolutely no idea. Well, that was like a question to me directly, but yeah, I don't know how it all works, so I don't know nothing.
I think it's the team who owns that. I think they're in the process of rewriting it all because they sort of built like a very rudimentary implementation for Python that it works, it's okay, but it had a bunch of problems and it wouldn't work for anything .NET related. So that's like definitely a top item that needs to get done. But that's also I don't know if it's like really an Ionide thing per se. I think it's more like there's like the Jupyter Notebooks like plugin feature basically. Like they're trying to figure out, should it be a plugin? Should it be like this implicit plugin that you can take a dependency on with other plugins, that sort of stuff. But I would expect that once that's in a pretty good space, then I could just say, oh, I also have this dependency, and then it would probably just work.
Yeah, just like we have dependency on OmniSharp.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it just works.
Yeah, man, it just works. I've tried yesterday debugging on Visual Studio Online. Not yesterday, 2 days ago on stream, and OmniSharp obviously crashed when I've tried to run debugger on Visual Studio Online. So yay, fun times.
Sounds like a lot of fun.
Okay, do we have anything we want to talk about still?
No, I think I probably got to get back to work stuff here because we have a slide deck that I got to fill out in the next 30 minutes.
What's the F-sharp story with Blazor client, by the way? There is a great project called FS Bolero that kind of
Yeah.
builds on top of that. So check it out.
Yeah, I would say Bolero is the right thing to check out. Because it depends on the base rate, the base Blazor experience. So, um,
Okay.
yeah, it just
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
cool.
Yeah. So thanks for joining me. That was a lot of fun.
Absolutely.
Maybe we'll do that again someday. If you'd want. If you'd want. I have one thing planned for like talking about in general editor tooling in functional programming with maybe get some people from like Elm community or Haskell community. That would be fun if we had like
Mhm.
some couple more people and just talk about how uh, every language has the best tooling.
Yeah, that could be fun.
Okay, yeah. So thanks Philip, and thanks everyone for watching. And there are a couple of
Absolutely.
links below, like my Twitter, my GitHub, Ionite if you want to support the stuff that I'm doing. And yeah, see you all, and bye bye.